Good morning, everyone. The acting Prime Minister, the Honourable Santia Bradshaw, will address the country on a number of issues, specifically noting concerns raised by opposition parties. The acting Prime Minister will speak now.
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning, Barbadians. This morning, I want to speak to you about some questions that have been raised by both the Leader of the Opposition as well as the President of the Democratic Labour Party about a regional company which now finds itself having to pursue legal action in the United States for the non-delivery of COVID-19 vaccines, which it would have paid for and then subsequently tried to procure for Barbados from a legitimate manufacturer. This, my friends, is a classic and yet very unfortunate example of the very deleterious environment which currently exists across the world as small and vulnerable countries try to gain access to life-saving medication. I want to take Barbadians back to February of this year, when Barbados and many other developing countries in the region and elsewhere were struggling to procure vaccines in order to inoculate their citizens from this dreaded COVID-19 virus. Several offers would have been made to the government of Barbados by private entities, private companies, private individuals as well, to assist in whatever way they could to source vaccines for Barbadians. The fact of the matter is that at that time, and I know we are here now, but the truth is that back then, several months ago, we were in a position where the rest of the world and Barbados was trying frantically to be able to get these much needed vaccines into the populations across the world. And I think it is fair to say that Barbados, well, certainly your government did not sit on its laurels and wait for vaccines to come, but rather what we had to do is reach out to not only these individuals and have them reach out to us, but we also had to take the opportunity to be aggressive in how we went after these vaccines to get these vaccines onto the island. But here's how the process works, because many people have said a lot of things about how this process has worked and about how the role that government has played in what has been making headlines over the course of the last few days. I want to state to the country that middlemen, or what we would call the intervening companies that work on behalf of governments, cannot actually purchase the vaccine, nor do they actually personally receive the vaccines themselves. There are certain rules that govern how vaccines can be purchased from the international manufacturers, and this can only be done if, first of all, the recipient government, with whom discussions are taking place with the intermediary persons, approve of such purchases, and secondly, that arrangements are put in place for the vaccines to be delivered directly, and I say directly, to the relevant authorities in the country under the auspices of the Ministry of Health, and in this case, it would be under the Ministry of Health and Wellness. In other words, vaccines do not go directly to any private party. They come directly from the manufacturers to the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Following its due diligence assessments and in keeping with its commitment to ensure the procurement of genuine doses of the vaccines from a legitimate manufacturer and through a credible entity, the government of Barbados agreed to and approved of this exclusively private sector-led and funded initiative to source the doses of the vaccines for the citizens of Barbados. And yes, we agreed to facilitate 1 million vaccines, because for those who understand the process, they would realize that it's not something that you can just say, I want 50, I want 100, I want 2,000. The way the market is working is that you have at least to purchase a minimum of about 1 million vaccines. And so it was our understanding that as other countries in the region also were grappling with how do they get vaccines as well, that we would have helped to facilitate other countries also being able to get some of the vaccines from the 1 million that were being ordered by the local supplier. Now, Barbados's quota was 300,000, so the remaining 7,000, I believe the supplier was in discussions with other territories, which have also come to the fore as well, and indicated that they were in discussions with them regarding the supply of those vaccines. But again, at that time, there was a situation where there was a scarcity of vaccines, not only in Barbados, but across the entire region. And therefore, having someone who could actually purchase these vaccines, in particular in these large quantities, with a view that we would enter into relationships across the region to be able to purchase it, for us certainly was an attempt to be able to get vaccines into the arms of as many people as possible. Unfortunately, having entered into good faith dealings with an extra-regional supplier to procure the said vaccines for Barbados, the regional private sector company Radical Investments Limited has apparently been unable to get the said supplier to hold up its end of the arrangements and deliver the vaccines as promised. And I think on many occasions you would have heard both the Prime Minister and Minister Bostic say to the country that we were awaiting the arrival of vaccines, and on different occasions we kept saying we were trying to source those vaccines and that they should be arriving shortly. That therefore was really what this was connected to. Now, while this is a private matter, because the individual company has actually pursued legal action against the company that they had been attempting to source the vaccines through, I want to make it abundantly clear that no taxpayer resources have actually been expended and directly given to the company for the particular sourcing of these vaccines. This is, however, a most unfortunate situation and one which highlights the wild, wild west environment of which the Prime Minister has spoken about on many occasions that currently obtains on the COVID vaccine market. Radical Investments did not receive a single cent from us and are therefore not expecting a refund from the Barbados government. The clear understanding at all times was that once the items were sourced and they arrived in Barbados, that the appropriate payments would be made to the company. Barbados has consistently called on the relevant international authorities and the national governments where the vaccine manufacturers are located to work with small countries such as ours in order to open up the market for fair and transparent trading in the sourcing and procurement of the various COVID-19 vaccines. Sadly, this call has fallen on deaf ears, and that has been, obviously, as we've seen in recent weeks, much to the detriment of the rest of the region. While we sincerely hope that our private sector partners will be able to recover some of their investment in full or total investment, and I understand that already some of the payments have in fact been refunded to them, I want to take this opportunity to express gratitude, however, to them for coming forward at that time to assist the country when we really did not have a clue where we were getting these vaccines from. And they certainly tried to be able to get the vaccines from whatever sources they could, and going through the various intermediaries in order to obtain the vaccines from AstraZeneca. The other point that I want to make is that this agreement, which is the subject of media attention at the moment, is not the only agreement that the Barbados government would have entered into in order to procure vaccines. And as I said earlier, it was a wild, wild west situation. We had to basically explore as many options as possible. And we also entered into an agreement with a world-class premier medical facility through one of their regular medical suppliers for the supply of vaccines. On that occasion, however, we did pay a deposit to the company. But the truth is the company experienced some difficulties sourcing vaccines because, again, that was the nature of the time where it was difficult to source the vaccines. And so they found themselves in a position where, despite having the monies from us, because they could not deliver on what we had requested of them, we ended up having the monies refunded to the government of Barbados. And that really was the only instance where we actually paid funds out to a private company. But the truth is that we got every cent back, and therefore Barbadians can rest assured that we have been able to make sure that taxpayers' monies are not in any way wasted or lost in the sourcing of these vaccines. We've been fortunate, however, though, that in the months which followed this initial race for vaccines, we secured donations from India, and again, it was through an individual who had a contact through the Indian government. The Foreign Affairs Ministries got involved, and that was how we were able to procure the first set of AstraZeneca vaccines that Barbadians were able to take. After that, and I think with all of the attention that had been paid to the small and vulnerable states, we would realize that we've been able to get the vaccines through the COVAX facility. We've also had the recent doses of the Pfizer vaccine. We also had donations from the People's Republic of China as well. So the government has always been committed to seeking and sourcing approved vaccines from legitimate sources. And I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that we intend to leave no stone unturned in order to be able to ensure that Barbadians are afforded the best quality health care in a timely and complete manner so as to protect the health of this country. The leader of the opposition, in what I consider to be rather clumsy questioning and certainly, alluding to some insinuations on the character of this government with respect to the integrity of the process, questioned a number of things about the process. But there was never an issue of vaccines becoming corrupted. The impression was given that it was not clear whether the persons who would have been bringing in the vaccines, if they were getting it from the original manufacturer, or whether the vaccines had been tampered with, giving the impression that, again, speaking to things that perhaps he may not have within his certain knowledge, and that has become clear. But the truth of the matter is that COVID vaccines are sold consistently with internationally accepted standards and protocols. In this instance, it would have been a shipment of vaccines from AstraZeneca directly to the government of Barbados. There would have been no middleman in the process of the packaging. There would have been no middleman in the process of the shipment or in respect of the delivery of the vaccines. And yes, the Ministry of Health and Wellness would have had discussions along with the Director of Finance with AstraZeneca directly for this particular arrangement, because that is the only way that AstraZeneca would afford the opportunity to any intermediary to be able to act on behalf of the government of Barbados. So the issue of false or fraudulent vaccines should never really have arisen in this discussion, and it should never have been brought into the discussion by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. The truth of the matter is that we are not talking about chocolates that you can pick from on the counter. We are talking about vaccines, and there is a separate and distinct process for the procurement of vaccines that exists within the global community. With respect to the query as to whether or not the government procurement department should have been at the center of procuring these items, because I think Barbadians know that we have a procurement process in place, the truth of the matter is that if you can find anywhere in the world where a government procures, the government department rather, procures directly through its procurement department for these vaccines, please step forward, because that is not the process. And I think that it is a bit disingenuous and perhaps misleading by those who may not know any better to suggest that in any way that it could have been dealt with differently. This is what obtains, and anybody who speaks to it in a different way obviously has not been following this process for the past 18 months and has not obviously been as intimately involved in the process of the vaccine war and the chase to be able to get vaccines across the entire region. On this issue, I want to just remind Barbadians as well that we were the first country to secure vaccines out of all of the independent countries because of our aggressive approach to vaccines. And I get that the President of the Democratic Labour Party may not fully appreciate this race that the Barbados Labour Party administration has and the aggressive nature in which we deal with things, because we like to deal with things frontally. We understand what is at stake in this country. We don't have, a lot of resources, but the truth of the matter is that we understand that our resources are our people. And we have done everything that we possibly can over the past couple of months to make sure that we could get the best quality of the vaccines for our people and to make sure that our people had a fighting chance. The reality is that were it not for the level of vaccination and our aggression in getting these vaccines in the first place, the truth of the matter is that we would not be able to boast that we have 1 in every 2 persons vaccinated and that we still need to have more of our population vaccinated. But this situation could have been far worse with the Delta variant if it had come earlier on in this discussion. If this had come in February, we would be in a far worse situation than we are in today. And that is not to say, Barbadians, that we're not in a situation where we need to take stock of where we are, because we are still at a critical stage in the process of trying to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. But at the same time, we have done everything as a government, whether it is the setting up of the Harrison Point facility, whether it is the inclusion of doctors from Cuba, the nurses from Cuba and the doctors from Cuba, whether it is the Ghanaian nurses. At every juncture, we have been trying our best to provide a certain standard and a level of health care to all Barbadians, whether visitors or tourists, but for all Barbadians to be able to have some level of benefit during this particular period. And the truth is that, it is very difficult as one who has been in this process from the very beginning, when we hear these types of criticisms that are meant to cast doubts upon the process, because the truth is that we stand by the supplier who came to the fore at that very difficult time, and who now has had to pursue legal action to be able to recoup the funds that he would have expended at the time in order to assist the government of Barbados. And I want to remind Barbadians that it wasn't just a local individual that would have stepped forward, but we also had, as I said before, we had other persons who are closely connected to Barbados, but our very own Rihanna also attempted at the time, at the peak of this crisis, to assist us even to get ventilators into Barbados. And the stories regarding the issues of that process are well known to Barbadians. So it is not to say that it has been unusual for the government of Barbados to reach out to people, or even to have people reach out to us to act as intermediaries if they're in a better position to be able to source things, whether PPE or whether to source vaccinations for our country. Now, I want to move on to another matter raised by the president of the Democratic Labour Party as it relates to a donation that was made by the Student Revolving Loan Fund, which is a local charity, the Eden Lodge Charitable Trust. And I know that there were some comments that were made in one of the newspapers recently in relation to questioning public funds and integrity, and seeking to convey the impression that something untoward had been done by the Student Revolving Loan Fund in making a donation of the sum of $5,000 to this charity. Let me just say at the outset that, the Student Revolving Loan Fund does not receive any subventions or financial support from central government. In other words, not a cent of the taxpayers' money. This has been the case since 2009, and perhaps if both the leader of the opposition, the leader of the Democratic Labour Party, or even the said journalists had taken the opportunity to check the facts and check the files, they would have recognized that that is a basic fact that exists. But where does the Student Revolving Loan Fund get its money from? We ensure at the Student Revolving Loan Fund that the repayments from the loans that are given to our students are repaid, because that is the only way to sustain the organization and to sustain the ability of the fund to be able to assist other students who, for whatever reason, may not be able to afford to cover their tuition. And we've reaped a measure of success in this regard, as over the course of the past few years, the delinquency rate has come down from 27% in 2017 to less than 17% at the end of March of this year. And the goal really is to continue to bring it down below 10%. But the pandemic, truthfully, has not helped in this regard, because we've had to assist a number of families, a number of households to be able to honor their commitments to the Student Revolving Loan Fund. And we recognize that in this environment, we cannot be as hard and fast as perhaps we may have been. And there's been a level of leniency given in many cases where hardship has obviously been shown. But the fact that despite not receiving money from central government, the government of Barbados, and by extension the people of Barbados, are really the owners of the Student Revolving Loan Fund. And it means that the management of the Student Revolving Loan Fund has a fiduciary duty to manage the resources prudently, effectively, and to be accountable. And let me just say that it has been consistently providing its monthly reports and certainly financials and audited financial statements, which will come up on the website shortly. But the truth of the matter is that donations to charitable organizations by the Student Revolving Loan Fund are not new. I'm well aware that, at the beginning of this crisis, when the government of Barbados was also seeking to procure devices. A donation of $100,000 in computers was made to the Ministry of Education to support the cause for those students who could not afford it. We've also had the Cancer Society, another charitable organization, who, by the way, we have children who have cancer and who, for one reason or the other, their families may not be able to afford, whether it's uniforms, supplies, back to school items. And for that reason, because it is an organization that is focused on helping to ensure that people are not left behind, that they have also given to the Barbados Cancer Society. But they haven't just stopped there, Barbadians. They have also launched and worked with the Shoebox Initiative, which is also an entity which provides what we would shoe boxes basically, but in the shoe boxes they have basic supplies and toys to the Nightingale's Children's Home. So the query that has been raised about the Eden Lodge Charitable Trust is quite disturbing, because especially for those who work in the Student Revolving Loan Fund and who know that this has been consistently been the way in which they have responded, not only through this pandemic but previously, it is quite worrying for them, because they recognize that while we may not be able to give the loan financing, that where the fund has any funds that are available to assist persons to be able to help students to be able to meet their expenses in relation to tuition or in relation to books or to uniforms, then they have so budgeted those amounts to be able to assist. Now, back in 2020, the Student Revolving Loan Fund would have received an initial request from the Eden Lodge Charitable Trust for sponsorship of their back-to-school program. The program would have involved providing uniforms, books, and other supplies for children in need. However, the request at the time was actually denied, as there were no budgeted funds for expenditure in that first year. The trust came back in this financial year and requested additional assistance, and the Student Revolving Loan Fund requested from them their financials to be able to make sure that there were an entity that was actually giving to students to get an idea as to the types of programs that they were engaged in. And it was upon that basis that the board of the Student Revolving Loan Fund felt that the initiative being put forward by the trust was one that fit well within the mandate of the Student Revolving Loan Fund. It should be noted, though, that none of the $5,000 that was paid to the trust was paid to the trust. So let me say that again. None of the $5,000 was actually paid to the trust directly, but it was in fact paid to two businesses in Bridgetown. And those two businesses supply the uniforms and the books, which the children of Barbados, who would have been the beneficiaries, would have benefited from. And as such, this approach, having been agreed by both the Student Revolving Loan Fund as well as by the Eden Lodge Charitable Trust, has meant that no funds actually directly went into the hands of any individual or entity in this country, but rather went directly to the suppliers, where our Barbadian school children who are in need would be able to go to get much needed supplies from these particular donors. Now, I don't know what is so difficult for the public of Barbados to understand about that. We have at the Student Revolving Loan Fund made best efforts even to expand its reach to be able to allow our teachers as well to benefit from things like devices, because they may not want the devices alone that the Ministry of Education provides, but they may want their own device, and they may want to pay for their own device in their own time. And we've made the provisions to allow for that as well. So I want to put to rest this issue that funds have been misappropriated in any way, that funds have been applied in some way that it presents a level of mismanagement on the part of the Student Revolving Loan Fund, but rather to say to the public that the Student Revolving Loan Fund is working well, and that I would encourage Barbadians who have benefited from the fund to support the funds by paying back the monies that have been loaned to you, so that other young people across this country can benefit from those resources. Lastly, Barbadians, while I'm here, I think it is important for me as well to mention that later on this afternoon, certainly this team that is here with me, as well as some of the others, will be at the Harrison Point facility. We have 168 cases today, and Regrettably, we have reported another 3 deaths. There are more young people who are getting sick, and I think that last week, when we would have indicated that we were going to speak to the country from the perspective of education and the return to school, it was against a background where we were looking at a roadmap where we wanted to be able to get back to school, and we wanted to start our discussions with the various stakeholders to be able to see how best we could do this. But we are seeing every single day, we've seen an uptake in the vaccines, yes, amongst our teens and our preteens, but we need to get the numbers up so that our young people can get back to school. We need to see the numbers up so that we can also get the adult population vaccinated so that we can get back some degree of normalcy. I don't know about you, but it pains me to have to know that our children are not able to get back into the school environment. It pains me to know that they're missing out on their education. And while we have, with the help of the Ministry of Health and Wellness, looked at some thresholds to be able to help all of our schools to move back to a level of normalcy, the truth of the matter is that, especially at the public school level, we're going to have to do a bit more in order to allay the fears of parents, allay the fears of teachers, allay the fears of the unions, allay the fears of the principals, and certainly allay the fears of these children as well, in order to get them back into the school environment, even in a Delta environment. And with that, we have agreed that we will continue our consultations. I have a consultation coming up on Friday with in conjunction with the National Council of Parent Teachers Associations, where we're going to talk with the parents, and we're going to talk about the state of where we are, the online environment. We're going to talk about the roadmap and looking at some of their concerns in terms of getting back to school. We're going to talk about some of the plans that we have to be able to improve the school plan so that we can readily take children, even if with a 6 feet distancing at some point, as opposed to 3 feet. So it isn't to say that we are avoiding the issue of education. Right now, as you are seeing coming out every single day, we are as concerned as you are about these numbers. And so where schools and the management and the teachers and the parents have come to a position in terms of a threshold where teachers are vaccinated and parents are comfortable, we will work with them through the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health and Wellness, and the COVID monitoring unit to allow students to be able to go back to school. But that is a work in progress. And so while that is our intention, the truth of the matter is that we are chartering a roadmap to be able to get us to that point. So in the same way that the Prime Minister said to you before she went off on her visit overseas, that we are working as a country towards a threshold that we want to get 10,000 persons a week vaccinated. Equally, we want to make sure that especially our 12 to 17-year-olds are vaccinated before they can return to school. We want to make sure that at least 70% of our teachers and ancillary staff are vaccinated within our schools if they are to return to school. And we also want to be able to acquire the relevant kits for testing to be able to give another layer of protection to all of the other students and certainly to our teachers within the school environment. Because I'm sure you're aware that there's nasal swabs that can be used on children. There's also the saliva test, and we've heard the concerns from the unions from our discussions, and we want to be able to explore all of these things before we are able to fully come to the country and say we're going back into school in this particular way. So I hope that that gives you an idea of where we are. It's not by any means an easy situation to be in. There's no playbook for education. I'm not going to say we're making it up as we're going along, but the truth of the matter is every day the dynamics change, and I don't think any of us expected that our children would be getting as sick as they are. So my final words to Barbadians is really, let us get this country vaccinated. Those who are hesitant, we get it. We understand the hesitation. But let us understand that this is not just about us as well. If you're not going to be vaccinated, at least wear your mask. At least make sure that you are socially distanced. At least make sure that you sanitize. But let us not prevent our children in particular from being able to get back to their education. And in so doing, I pray and hope that Barbadians continue to be safe in this environment, but that we take advantage of the opportunities being given by this government to be able to take advantage of the vaccination process in our communities so that you can get vaccinated and you can get your children vaccinated as well. Thank you, Barbadians. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. That was the Acting Prime Minister, the Honorable Santia Bradshaw. And just a reminder that we will have that live broadcast coming from the Harrison Point Isolation Facility around 3:30 this afternoon, and we hope that you will join. Do have a wonderful afternoon. Until then.